Good morning, and welcome to our series, Questions and Answers for a World in Crisis. Today, our subject is animals. And the questions posed to Mother are, as always, answered by her in so beautiful and often powerful ways. The first question to the mother: what kind of love do animals have for men? And Mother replies, it is almost the same as that of rather unintellectual men for the divine. It is made of admiration, trust, and a sense of security. Admiration, it seems to you something really very beautiful. And it is not reasoned out, an admiration from the heart, so to speak, spontaneous. For instance, dogs have this in a very high degree. And then, trust. Naturally, this is sometimes mixed with other things, with a feeling of some need and dependence. For it is that person who will give me to eat when I am hungry, give me shelter when it is rough weather, who will look after me. This is not the most beautiful side. And then, unfortunately, it gets mixed up. And I consider it entirely man's fault, with a kind of fear. A feeling of dependence and a kind of fear of something which is much stronger, much more cautious, which can harm you, and you have no strength to defend yourself. It is a pity, but I believe it is altogether man's fault. But if men really deserved the love of animals, it would be made of a feeling of wonder and of the sense of security. It is something very fine. This sense of security, something that's able to protect you, to give you all that you need, and near which you can always find shelter. Animals have an altogether rudimentary mind. They are not tormented by incessant thoughts like human beings. For example, they feel a spontaneous gratitude for an act of kindness towards them, whilst men, 98 times out of 100, begin to reason and ask themselves what interest one could have in being good. This is one of the great miseries of mental activity. Animals are free from this. And when you are kind to them, they are grateful to you spontaneously. And they have trust. So their love is made of that. And it turns into a very strong attachment, an irresistible need to be near you. There is something else. If the master is a really good one, and the animal faithful, there is an exchange of psychic and vital forces, an exchange which becomes for the animal something wonderful, giving it an intense joy. when they like to be quite close to you in that way, when you hold them, it is that they vibrate internally. The force one gives them, the strength of affection, of tenderness, protection, all that, they feel it. And it creates a deep attachment in them. Even fairly easily, in some of the higher animals like dogs, elephants, and even horses, it creates quite a remarkable need for devotion. Parentheses, which indeed is not thwarted by all the reasonings and arguments of the mind, end parentheses, which is spontaneous and very pure in its essence, something that's very beautiful. Ah, yes, there are animals which are much more advanced than we. Animals have much more perfect senses than those of men. I challenge you to track a man as a dog does, for instance. This means that in the curve, or rather the spiral of evolution, animals, parentheses, and more so those we call higher animals, because they resemble us more closely, end parentheses, are governed by the spirit of the species, which is a highly conscious consciousness. Bees, ants, obey the spirit of the species, which is of quite a special quality. And what is called instinct in animals is simply obedience to the spirit of the species, which always knows what ought and ought not to be done. There are so many examples, you know. You put a cow in a meadow. It roams around, sniffs, and suddenly puts out its tongue and snatches a blade of grass. Then it wanders about again, sniffs, and gets another tuft of grass, and so it goes on. Has anyone ever known a cow under these conditions to eat poisonous grass? But shut this poor animal up in a cowshed, gather and put some grass before it, and the poor creature, which has lost its instinct, because now it obeys man, parentheses, excuse me, end parentheses, eats the poisonous grass along with the rest of it. We have already had 3 such cases here. 3 cows which died from eating poisonous grass. And these unfortunate animals, like all animals, have a kind of respect, parentheses, which I could call unjustifiable, end parentheses, for the superiority of man. If he puts poisonous grass before the cow and tells it to eat, it eats it. But left to itself, that is, without anything interfering between it and the spirit of the species, it would never do so. All animals which live close to man lose their instinct because they have a kind of admiration full of devotion for this being who can give them shelter and food without the least difficulty. And a little fear too, for they know that if they don't do what man wants, they will be beaten. It is quite strange. They lose their ability. Dogs, for instance, the sheepdog, which lives far away from men with the flocks, and has a very independent nature. Parentheses. It comes home from time to time and knows its master well, but often does not see him. End parentheses. If it is bitten by a snake, it will remain in a corner, lick itself, and do all that is necessary till it gets cured. The same dog, if it stays with you and is bitten by a snake, dies quietly like man. I had a very sweet little cat, absolutely civilized, a marvelous cat. It was born in the house, and it had the habit all cats have. That is to say, if something moved, it played with that. Just then, there was in the house a huge scorpion. As was its habit, the cat started playing with the scorpion, and the scorpion stung it. But it was an exceptional cat. It came to me. It was almost dying, but it showed me its paw where it was bitten. It was already swollen and in a terrible state. I took my little cat, it was really sweet, and put it on a table and called Sri Aurobindo. I told him, Kiki has been stung by a scorpion. It must be cured. The cat stretched its neck and looked at Sri Aurobindo. Its eyes already a little glassy. Sri Aurobindo sat before it and looked at it also. Then we saw this little cat gradually beginning to recover, to come around, and an hour later it jumped to its feet and went away completely healed. In those days, I had the habit of holding a meditation in the room where Sri Aurobindo slept. And it was regularly the same people who came. Everything was arranged. But there was an armchair in which this very cat always settled beforehand, did not wait for anyone to get into the chair. It got in first itself. And regularly it went into a trance. It was not sleeping. It was not in the pose cats take when sleeping. It was in a trance. It used to start up. It certainly had visions. And it let out little sounds. It was in a profound trance. It remained thus for hours together. And when it came out from that state, it refused to eat. It was awakened and given food, but it refused. It went back to its chair and fell again into a trance. This was becoming very dangerous for a little cat, but this was not an ordinary cat. To finish my story, if you leave an animal in a normal state, far from man, it obeys the spirit of the species. It has a very sure instinct, and it will never commit any stupidities. But if you take it and keep it with you, it loses its instinct, and then it is you who must look after it, for it no longer knows what should or should not be done. I was interested in cats to make an experiment, a sort of inverse metempsychosis, if one can call it that. That is, to see if this could be their last incarnation as animals, if they were ready to enter a human body in the next life. The experiment succeeded fully. I had 3 absolutely flagrant instances. They left with a psychic being sufficiently conscious to enter a human body. But this is not what men ordinarily do. What they usually do is to spoil the consciousness, or rather the instinct, of animals. Question to the mother. In our yoga, what attitude should we take towards animals? Mother's reply. One can have the true attitude only when one has attained the consciousness of the divine oneness. Meanwhile, it is good always to treat animals with respect, love, and compassion. And the last question, but shouldn't we kill pests? Mother replies, of course. Thank you.